Hi, Dr. Hanscomb. Welcome to Ideology Podcast.
Well, thank you. Happy to
Uh,
be here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I read your paper where you talk about, the gift of consciousness. This is a subject that is very dear to everyone who listens to me, who follows me. It's something I'm very passionate about. But I think the best place for us to start is to talk about chronic pain and understand chronic pain. Now, you are an MD, you're a practiced orthopedic surgeon, 30 plus years, right?
I practiced spine surgery, complex spine surgery for 32 years, right?
But I'm really interested to actually talk about your personal experience with chronic pain and help us understand a little bit about what causes chronic pain.
Well, I'm going to shift the conversation right from the beginning. It turns out that anxiety is the pain. So I read a blog for Psychology Today that now has over 1.3 million views. And the title of the blog is Anxiety, Another Name for Pain. Anxiety actually is the pain. So I'm trying to get rid of the word chronic pain and use terms of chronic disease states. So mental and physical chronic disease have the same root cause.
Wow.
And it's sustained exposure to fight or flight.
And so
And so when fight or flight, your body breaks down.
you're saying that mental pain, anxiety is what's causing our physical pain.
Well, they're the same thing.
They're the same thing. Can you help
Right.
us understand
So
that a little?
here's what happens if you, okay, every creature from bacteria to reptiles to fish to mammals and then to humans has to survive. And
Mhm.
so every organism and has a program to gravitate away from danger and to head towards safety when they can. But we're biased towards avoiding danger because safety is critical to replenish fuel to fight another day, but you have to fight to stay alive.
Right.
And for every living creature, life is not our friend. We have to compete to stay alive. You have to
Mhm.
compete for resources. You have to look for food. We're privileged in that we don't have to fight for them like many people do, especially in this day and age. But life is not our friend. We have to compete. So your body's so every living creature is on the lookout for danger. For instance, dolphins sleep with one eye open. You can't you look at my cat in a millisecond, she's awake if she hears the slightest sound.
Mhm.
So every living creature is on high alert, including humans.
Mhm.
Humans have a problem. You have language that makes it much more complicated, which we'll talk about later. But basically, when your body goes into fight or flight, senses danger, we have a chemical reaction. Every living creature has that. Now, humans have language, and so we call it anxiety. So, anxiety is just a sensation generated by a threat, whether the threat's a mental threat or a physical threat, it doesn't matter. Because we also know that mental threats are processed in a similar part of the brain as physical pain, physical threats. So if a dog starts charging at you, you go into fight or flight. If your boss yells at you, you go into fight or flight. If you're lying on the beach trying to enjoy the beach, and you're thinking about your boss yelling at you, are you relaxed?
No.
No. See, that's the difference that humans have compared to my cat is that my cat can lie on the beach and just take a nap. Well, she's not the beach, but in general, she'll lay down. So a dog may chase her, dog's gone, then she lays down and takes a nap. Your
Mhm.
boss yells at you, or you get in a fight with your spouse. Well, once the fight is over, you don't just lay down and take a nap. Your brain keeps spinning for quite a while.
Yeah.
So that's what humans have that's different from other creatures. But the bottom line is that when your body's in fight or flight, you have a sensation of danger. Humans have given that a word. We have given that word anxiety.
Right.
It's a survival reaction that is a million times stronger than your conscious brain. So your unconscious brain processes between 20 to 40 million bits of information per second, 20 to 40 million.
Mhm.
Blood pressure, acid base balance, your pupils dilate or not. So your unconscious brain is incredible. Your conscious brain processes 40 bits of information per second, 40. So you're
Wow.
looking at 40 million compared to 40. So you have this incredible survival response. But the issue here that's so key is that that survival reaction is intended to be incredibly unpleasant. because the species of creatures who didn't pay attention to that signal just didn't survive.
Right. But so in our modern life, as you've said, we might not be, going out to hunt for food and all of those things that really should keep us in fight or flight. So what is it that causes us to bite? So for example, a boss might yell at me. Of course, I would take that as a threat because I could lose my job, then lose my home. And so I understand that. But sometimes we stress about things that aren't that, a passive aggressive comment, a mean remark on social media that really shouldn't threaten us.
So we have no choice over that. So I'm writing another book called Repetitive Unpleasant Thoughts. I call them ruts. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the basis of all chronic disease, are this inability to escape our thoughts. So remember, okay, every living creature has to survive to avoid danger, and humans have language. Mm-hmm. And so it turns out that thoughts are processed in the same way that physical pain is. So if unpleasant thoughts are input, and your body's chemistry are emotions, your body's chemistry is physiology, either fight or flight or safety. So those are the emotions, is what you feel. Mm-hmm. So unpleasant thoughts are input, emotions are what you feel. The problem is unpleasant thoughts, you can't escape them. Right. So they're there. And then what happens, it creates this physiological reaction, is unpleasant. And then we suppress them, which actually fires up the physiology even more. So it turns out that suppressed thoughts create more of a physiological response than expressed ones. And so when you think the thoughts or suppress the thoughts, you're in trouble.
Okay. Wow.
So, and it gets really perverse. And we can get to this for a second now, maybe do this later, is that you are in our society, you obviously are with a group of people who are attractive, they take care of themselves, they look good. But it turns out that your most positive traits become your monsters. With a nuclear physicist or an athlete or a model or whatever it is. Or, for instance, if you are an attractive person as part of your identity course, but it also becomes your monster.
Right.
Because what happens is the way the brain works is that, okay, you enjoy being attractive. That's great. But then what your unconscious brain is showing you ways that you may not be attractive. In other words, your unconscious brain never stops. Your conscious brain is intermittent. It's a 1,000,000 to 1 mismatch. So your unconscious brain is always looking for danger and looking at the ways that you might not be attractive. For instance, every human being has some degree, maybe minimal, maybe a lot, has some degree of a body image disorder.
Yeah.
Why would I say that? What's that?
I've become, for example, more aware of it. Now I'm in my late 40s. I am noticing that, I'm starting to try not to fixate, but for example, fixate on all the changes, the gray hair. And, I feel like I never used to be obsessed with wearing makeup as much. And I'm trying to really, really not fixate, but then so much of what is fed to us is praising being youthful all the time. And so can you explain?
What I just said, what happens when you try not to think about it?
Yeah.
It gets worse, right? And it gets worse with time and repetition because it's a programming issue. Our brains are programmed by our environment. We get programmed by our life. So with time and repetition, it gets worse. So again, what's perverse is that it doesn't matter what degree of attractiveness you have. So you have people that aren't very attractive. You think, well, they must not care about themselves. They actually care about themselves more, but they've given up. In other words, there's all sorts of phases of fight or flight. There's flight, fight, freeze, or faint, or we call it dissociating. You just give up. In other words, you're so tired of these thoughts, you just say, screw it, I can't do anything. So that's not a sign of healthfulness where you don't care about your parents. Well, you've given up. Everybody, by definition, has to care about their parents because we're a competitive species. The more attractive you are, the more competitive you are, but it becomes your monster. So same thing as, let's take professional athletes. They're having terrible trouble with mental health in the athletic world. So you're a professional athlete. So what I'm saying is your identity, whatever your identity is, becomes your monster. So a
Okay, so
professional
in the
athlete,
case of a professional athlete,
right.
because whenever I exercise, I find actually I do have a sense of calm, a sense of being in my body. So I'm always envious of professional athletes because I think they must have that all the time.
No, they have the opposite. So there's two things. You just said two things which are really important. First of all, exercise is anti-inflammatory. It calms the physiology. So when you exercise, it's not psychological. You're actually stimulating your body to secrete what's called anti-inflammatory cytokines that come from the muscles called myokines, which are very anti-inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
So jumping way back in the conversation just for a second. So the essence of all chronic disease is the same problem, the sustained fight or flight. So the essence of chronic disease, mental and physical, is a sustained fight or flight. And the essence of healing is that you minimize time there. You can't get rid of it. In other words, anxiety and anger are necessary for life. They are a gift. If you didn't have anxiety and anger, you wouldn't survive. So, but again, they're supposed to be incredibly unpleasant, and they are. And the essence of healing is decreasing your time there and maximizing time and safety. So, actually, so again, sustained fight or flight means your inflammation goes up, your metabolism goes up. In other words, you're consuming fuel, your stress hormones, of course, go up. Your brain itself becomes inflamed. Half your brain is inflammatory cells called glial cells. So your brain itself becomes inflamed. So with professional athletes, when they're actually in the game and playing, they're fine. I mean, they're thinking about the game only. So they are exercising, but see, it's their identity.
Wow.
So am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? And so, of course, it's incredibly competitive at the highest level. And so there's a major mental health crisis in professional athletes.
And would you
So
say
it's not
the same then for anything that you make an identity then?
absolutely anything, doesn't matter what it is. I mean, if you're a nuclear physicist, am I the best physicist? And see, and then the other problem with the human brain is, again, we're into survival mode. I call it your personal brain scanner, as your brain is always looking out for trouble.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I can joke about this. My wife has heard this story before, but we can be walking around a beautiful lake and she's worried about dying.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is your brain never stops. And again, it's always looking out for trouble. And we're programmed to look out for trouble. And then the other problem in modern times, you mentioned social media, is that one of my mentors pointed out that the human brain never evolved to process this much sensory input per day. We're out there hunting for food, sitting on the prairie, waiting for prey, just calm and relaxed. Well, I wouldn't say relaxed. I mean, there's other dangers involved, but they're more physical dangers.
Yeah.
So right now in 2007, the bidirectional smartphone came into play. And in teens, the deaths of despair have gone through the ceiling. And it's and so Dr. Lustig out of Walnut Creek, not too far from me, wrote a book called Metabolical and Fat Chance. And he looks at inflammatory diets as a major problem.
Mm-hmm.
So your diets itself actually inflame the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you have but he gave a lecture looking at the bidirectional cell phone. And so it's that feedback that, first of all, is addicting. You can't get away from it. There's dopamine involved with the cell phone. Then you're visually programmed with what life should be. Then we have this massive FOMO, fear of missing out, that gets really hankered in there. So then your major identity becomes a problem. And then what's your identity anyway? So your identity comes down to approval or disapproval. And when your identity is at the mercy of other people's opinions, you're at their mercy. And we can go into, we'll go into detail in later podcasts about the solutions. This is a solvable problem.
Right.
So you cannot solve it psychologically because, again, your unconscious brain is going 1,000,000-to-1 ratio over your conscious brain. Mind over matter only makes it worse. Positive thinking makes it really worse. It's a way of suppressing. So whether you're doing in psychology is a disaster. And it depends on the psychology. Now, somatic psychology helps you calm down is one thing. Talk therapy is a disaster because where's your attention?
You're the whole time on the problems.
Right. I personally I'll just tell you my story briefly to illustrate a couple of things. So I came from an abusive childhood. period. It was very bad. But I was in high alert all the time. So anxiety and anger to me were normalized. That's just the way that was life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even know I was anxious. I didn't know what the word meant. I was on hyper alert. And then the way I hid my anger, the way I hid my anxiety was being self-critical, perfectionistic, which is anger. So what happens, anger covers up the feeling of anxiety. There's a genealogy of anger where you have a circumstance that you blame, you're a victim, and you're angry. And so I was a perfectionist. Mm-hmm. So I was always a victim of less than perfect. So I was always agitated, always frustrated. And I accomplished a lot. People say, well, I use my anxiety to be successful. Well, I was a major spine surgeon and I got really sick. Mm-hmm. So I had a panic attack on the 520 bridge in Seattle at 10 o'clock one night in 1990. And in my attitude, the way I dealt with stress was bring it on. You cannot give me enough stress. You cannot believe the amount of stress. I just said, bring it on. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what the word anxiety even meant. I had to look the word up in a dictionary when somebody came in with an anxiety disorder. So I went from fearless spine surgeon, from being a fearless spine surgeon to crippling anxiety in 5 minutes. So my heart started to race. I started to sweat. I couldn't breathe hardly. I started to pass out. I thought I was having a heart attack. I was only 37 years old. And that started a series of 15 years of panic attacks, anxiety, depression, full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder. I had migraines, ringing in my ears, burning in my feet, stomach issues, back pain, neck pain. I had 17 different physical and mental symptoms. Nobody could tell me what was going on. By 2002, I developed a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder, which is manifested by repetitive intrusive thoughts. And of all the physical symptoms I had, these unbelievable thoughts took me down. And there's a very direct link between ruminations or ruminating thoughts and suicide. That data is deep. I didn't know that. In fact, I just found that out a few weeks ago, by the way, about the data on that. So I was suicidal. I started to commit suicide, and it was all my physical symptoms. Is my inability to escape these thoughts that took me out. And other animals don't commit suicide. They don't have these thought patterns. And so these thoughts are torturous. And I'm writing a book now on repetitive unpleasant thoughts. I'm not using the term OCD because people say, well, I don't have OCD. Well, everybody has repetitive thoughts, just the way the brain works. Mm-hmm. And they're at a level that would not come close to OCD, but they're certainly bothersome, very frustrating.
Yeah.
And I became completely disabled by them. They're considered unsolvable by the mental health world. Mm-hmm. So not only do I not have OCD, I don't have any of the symptoms. I don't have migraines. My ears don't ring. My feet don't burn. I don't have skin rashes.
Because you treated the repetitive, unwanted thoughts.
I don't have those either.
Right. And
so the thing is when the brain's in, what's that?
What caused that trigger? Was it because it had built up, and you were not able to pay attention because that was your normal state? And so this was just the body had enough? And
well, no, I mean, what happens to physicians, I think, but any professional or a lot of us, is that I was unbelievably good at just not complaining, putting my head down and suppressing at a level that's unheard of. I suppressed everything. But at the same time I didn't feel anxiety. I didn't know I was angry. First of all, I was raised in an environment that had anxiety and anger as a baseline. So I normalized those. I didn't think I had a problem. So at the same time, I didn't feel anxiety. I had migraines. I had all these other physical symptoms. So your body in fight. So what happens is when you suppress thoughts and emotions, your body's in fight or flight.
Yes.
And so each organ's going to respond in its own way. So it turns out that cancer, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cardiac disease are all sustained threat physiology. And I just want to clarify for the audience that this is not psychological. It's your body's physiology, your body's chemistry is in fight or flight. It's like driving your car down the freeway in second gear. It's going to break down. So again, threat physiology is your neurotransmitters go from calming to excitatory. Your body secretes cortisol, which pulls fuel out of the cells for fight or flight. These little molecules called cytokines are molecules that are either inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. And in fight or flight, they're inflammatory. Every cell in your body has these cytokines. Your entire body's on fire. That's why there's so many different symptoms. Then that doesn't even include your stress hormones like adrenaline and your heart racing, etc. So threat physiology is a big deal. It consumes your entire body. And what happens, you need threat physiology to survive. In other words, you have a situation that's threatening, you have to survive, but you also have to get into safety to regenerate and refuel.
Yeah.
So what's happening, we'll talk about this at another time about how to accomplish this, but what doesn't work is positive thinking. That's a way of suppressing. Mind over matter doesn't work. Talk therapy doesn't work because you're trying to fix the problem and you're actually reinforcing the problem.
You're saying all of the things that we have been taught to cope with stress are not actually, they're harming us. Because I actually thought, oh, we just need more positivity. We need, more of the pop psychology. And really, that is my go-to for everything. Can you talk a little bit about why positive psychology is harmful?
Well, because remember, your unconscious brain processes between 20 to 40 million bits of information per second. Your conscious brain only processes 40, not 40 million, 40.
Oh,
So it's a complete mismatch, number one.
yeah.
Second of all, we try to create these stories about ourselves, like self-esteem and ego, to feel better about ourselves. They're
Yeah.
just stories. And the stories themselves are cognitive distortions, and they're not even accurate. So you have this conscious, so we call it self-esteem or ego. And so this whole thing to provide more self-esteem, and what you're doing, you're actually firing up the physiology even more. It's a complete mismatch. It's 1,000,000 to 1 mismatch. It has no chance of working. Then talk therapy has your attention on these neurological circuits, which actually reinforces those.
Yeah, you go to therapy for 1 whole hour, you talk about the worst things, and you leave actually feeling worse.
Right.
And finding so many people in your life that you can blame for why things turned out the way they turned out. I have to say,
Right.
I've always been a little bit unsure about therapy as therapy. We live in a time when bullying and our civil discourse and everything causes us to be in fight or flight all day. Every time there's a headline about we're just about to have World War III, how can we not be stressed? We'd have to be crazy.
So I call it the eye of the storm. So remember, the stress is the most stressful for anybody in the history of the world. Has always been the stress that you can't control.
Okay.
So you can't control your thoughts, period. None of us have any control over thoughts at the slightest amount. We cannot control our thoughts. It's not possible.
Control our thoughts. I find there are times when I have relative peace of mind and I'm aware of my thoughts, and it's not always the same. If I start off, for example, my morning on my phone and I go on Twitter, I'll have a completely different morning to if I go to the gym first, work out, and situate myself in my actual environment.
So you just gave the perfect answer. So you can't control your thoughts, but you can regulate your physiology. That's where the mental health world has missed it. As you start calming down the brain, then the thoughts drop down. So again, we mentioned before, exercise secretes what's called myokines, amongst other things. Your inflammation goes down, your physiology drops down more towards safety. So as the brain calms down, the thoughts calm down.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't control your physiology either, but you can regulate it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can't control the trigger of anxious or anger, because those are automatic survival responses, once you are aware that you're triggered, then there's a bunch of tools you can do to actually calm it down. So that's exactly what the treatment is, that you get used to going through. Again, it's not hard. And again, it's too complex for today's discussion, but what you described exactly is the solution. There are just a bunch of different ways of doing that.
What about, I have a lot of people in my life now who say that actually a lot of our problems come from the fact that we live in a less religious society. What role does spirituality and religion play in helping us cope better?
So that's a tricky question. So I'm going to answer it backwards. So
Mhm.
it is the ultimate answer to chronic disease. But if you do it as a spiritual bypass, it's a disaster. In other words, the data shows that if you can connect to your pain, in other words, allow yourself to feel. So there's two parts to healing. One is you allow yourself to work with your stress physiology. In other words, your stress physiology is a gift. So you learn to separate. So the problem is we get our identity confused with this stress reaction. So you separate your identity from the stress reaction, develop a working relationship with it. That's half the equation. Then the other half is nurturing joy, which means good food, good wine, good friends, spiritual journey. So what you do, you're moving away from the circuits. In other words, to try to fix the pain, you're actually trying to create the life that you want. Healing occurs with creativity. So spirituality is that we know that community
Mhm.
secretes what's called oxytocin, which is highly anti-inflammatory. So community is a huge anti-inflammatory process.
Mhm.
And so we're missing that. Spirituality, it doesn't matter what form it comes in, as long as you are not rigid about it, open your mind up to possibilities. So community with a group of people about the unknown is really critical. It actually is very helpful. So yeah, disintegration of the church is a problem. And again, that's its own separate topic. But yeah, the antidote to these stress circuits is play, good food, good wine, good friends, spirituality. But you can't do it to counteract the circuits because these circuits are so powerful, you can't actually be creative in that mode. But the other problem from a physiological basis, when you're anxious or frustrated, your thinking brain, which is called the neocortex, gets down regulated. There's less blood supply to your thinking brain. So people, if you notice when they're angry, aren't thinking clearly because they can't.
Mhm.
So it's a physiological process, not psychological again.
Mhm.
So that's the problem when you're angry and frustrated and blaming. By the way, everybody that heals, it's always around taking response, always about anger, every time. In other words, anger is an absolute block to healing because you're in intense fight or flight. And so it's sustained. And 90% of people in chronic disease are still angry at the situation that caused the problem in the first place. But the
Mhm.
person the most angry at is themselves. So again, the circumstance of anger is circumstance, victim, blame. I'm sorry, circumstance, blame, victim, anger.
Mhm.
And healing occurs when you take 100% responsibility for every aspect of your life.
Healing
So again,
occurs when you take 100% responsibility for your life. So I
right.
will tell you, something that's causing so much stress in all of our lives right now is, the amount of images that we're being fed. In the last few years, it was with COVID and the death ticker and how many people were dying of COVID. So how can we take responsibility for our lives when so much of it feels like it's coming from outside?
Well, okay. That's my whole point. I call it the eye of the storm. So we can't control our thoughts and we can't control most of our circumstances. So what the tools do, they bring you to the center of the storm. So I was watching this hurricane coming to New Orleans a few years ago called Hurricane Gustav.
Mhm.
Look at the pictures. Of course, the wind's spinning around like crazy and the center is calm. And the metaphor that hit my mind is that the wind represents your thoughts, but also represents your circumstances, most of which you can't control. So
Right.
what you do, there's ways. So again, positive thinking doesn't work.
Okay.
Suppression doesn't work. So there's tools to put yourself into the center where your body's physiology is relaxed. And so what happens, you inadvertently have more energy and capacity and creativity to actually solve the problems that you can solve. And then
Mhm.
you learn to actually truly separate and let go of the problems that you can't solve.
Right.
So I've done this multiple times. Again, my one thing that got me sick, I used to be I'm still an idealist in a way, but I haven't given up on my ideals. But if you stay agitated about something you have no control over, you're wasting your time.
Right. So how much of that is being not conscious, not just sort of not even aware that we're in the trap of these thoughts? It has us.
That's the challenge, is they're normalized.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a book here called The Way to Love by Dr. Anthony DeMello. I'm not a religious person. He's a Jesuit priest, and this book changed my life. My staff, my fellows, my patients read this. It's really the way to awareness, and
Okay.
he was very blunt.
Mm-hmm.
I still read it, once or twice a week for the last 15 years, and he just calls it right out.
Okay.
So but he looks at we're programmed by our lives. We're programmed by who everybody else thinks we should be. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're victims of our circumstances. And so if your peace of mind is dependent on other people's opinions, you're at the mercy of those opinions.
Oof.
That also includes your own, right? Because those opinions become your voice. Again, we can go into a lot of detail here, but the human brain is remarkable. It takes 20 years to program human consciousness. You can't really get into deep philosophical thinking until age 25. So we're remarkably programmable by our entire life.
If we were to sum up our understanding of how chronic pain functions,
Well, let's take pain out of the picture.
okay, pain.
And again, this is about chronic disease, mental and physical. I mean, again, mental and physical disease come from the same problem with sustained threat physiology. So the answer lies in minimizing time and threat physiology and increasing time and safety. But I can use one metaphor I think we can sum this up with,
Mhm.
if that's okay.
Yes.
So the principles I call, first of all, is we have a process called dynamic healing. And again, you can access it through my resources and websites called dynamic healing, where you have your stresses or challenges or basically your stresses. Then you have your nervous system that processes all the sensory input. And so you have the output of the body's physiology or chemistry to respond appropriately to this whole process. So there's ways of processing your input differently.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the stresses that are most stressful are the ones you cannot control, but you can process those differently. And then your nervous system, you can increase the resilience of that through diet, exercise, and sleep. And then physiology, you can directly control the physiology with different things that stimulate what's called the vagus nerve. So the principles of healing, I call it the sequence of healing. My wife came up with the word, so I use the word letter C, sequence of healing. Just visualize a tree with the soil representing your entire past. So the sequence is connection, confidence, and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that the roots of the tree are in the soil, and we're programmed by every second of our past up to this very second. Everything we do programs our brain to actually learn something was safe versus dangerous. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
So the key issue is we tend to analyze it, solve it, try to fix it, whitewash it, pretend it's not there, whatever, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our past is not very pleasant.
Right.
So the key is letting your roots go into the soil and allow yourself to be with the past, aware, just aware. And the only question to ask is what can I learn from the past?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So
So,
that's
in
the
your case, how did you reconcile that?
well, you can't reconcile it. That was my problem. I spent 13 years in psychotherapy trying to reconcile it.
Okay.
And so what happened is you try to reconcile it, your attention's on the problem, not the solution. So it
Mm-hmm.
just fired things up even more. So we tend to analyze it. I just thought if I knew enough about my past, and I know every millimeter after 13 years of psychotherapy,
Yeah.
I just thought if I knew enough, it would solve the problem. I
Right.
got way worse. But I
Yeah.
didn't know about neuroplasticity, which you can stimulate your brain to change any direction you want. So you
At
can
any
create
age.
pardon?
At any age.
Absolutely.
Right. So you can just literally almost draw a line in the sand where you tell yourself that happened. I
Right.
don't need to delve into what happened and almost make that part of the brain wither away, and then you
Ab-
start to create new memories. Is it
right.
that simple?
Absolutely. So see, if you fight the past, you're reinforcing it. Remember, the term is let me just define the term neuroplasticity really clearly. So I did not know about this in medical school.
Okay.
So neuroplasticity is your brain's capacity to change, and it changes by the millisecond. So there's 80 billion neurons in your brain. Each neuron is connected to 10,000 other neurons. And the neurons aren't even connected to each other. There's a space between each neurons called the synapse. So it's like just picture a hive of 80 billion honeybees climbing all over each other to process sensory input to optimize your chances of survival. I
Right.
mean, that's a whole different topic of how neuroplastic the brain is. But what happens, you said it really nicely. And if you listen to yourself, you're just right on the edge of actually solving your own problem. You point
Right.
out well, how you feel better with exercise. Well, guess what? That's anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
It's not to distract yourself.
I
It's actually anti-inflammatory.
I was just thinking about this today, actually, just getting ready for the podcast. This used to be my worst time of the year. And I find myself, like in the last few winters, just happy, smiling. And I've realized it's because in the last few years, I have my daughter's 12, but because she's very, Santa and excited about Christmas, and it's something I didn't really grow up with, I kind of let her get me excited about it. So now I constantly have Christmas songs playing in my head. And it's just made me really love this time and notice all the lights and look forward to it. And
Again, you see, you keep nailing this dead on. So this is exactly right. So one of the ultimate solutions to anxiety is play. There's also a process called mirror neurons. Is that when somebody laughs, other people laugh. When other people yawn, other people yawn. If somebody's in a bad mood, other people are in a bad mood. But it directly stimulates your brain to, it's called mirror neurons. So it's not psychological. Her joy is stimulating the part of your brain that knows how to play. It's called mirror neurons. So it
right.
turns out that the family issues, again, another topic, are the most powerful reasons people stay in pain. It's
Mhm.
also an extremely powerful way to come out of pain, but it's all about called mirror neurons.
How do you do that for somebody? Let's say now you have someone they're 80, they have for years lost their sense of joy, but maybe they want to get happier for their grandchildren. Can they start to, how do they do that? Because they don't even.
So yeah, that's why I wrote the book. So this is what I'd strongly recommend. Again, I'll get to the three C's. Let me get to the three C's of healing first. So we're talking about connection being the first one. So
Mhm.
picture a tree with the roots in the ground, and you just learn to be with your past. And the only question is, what can I learn? That's it. So
Mhm.
by the way, most inspiring patient I have, I still talk to her every week now. She's 87 years old now. She was in chronic pain for 55 years, and she is just a joy. It took about a year to come out of it. I learned a lot from her, and her name is Rita. She writes what's called Ritalins. Again, Rita is part of that, right? Ritalins.
Mhm.
And so eliciting joy is what she does. She's creative. So she came up with a word called nourishment, and it's a nourishment,
Mhm.
nourishment
Okay.
is that, and that's how this whole sequence evolved, is talking to her. So you ask, can anybody heal? 55 years of chronic pain. But what the doctors didn't ask her is that her first husband committed suicide. Then in 2008, when things got really bad, her 40-year-old son committed suicide.
Mm.
And nobody asked that question. So what do you think that does to your body's physiology?
Just you're miserable the whole time.
And so she is so excited about her new life. The gentleman who had 28 surgeries in 20 years has been pain-free now. He's in his 60s. He is exercising every day. He's with his grandchildren. And I did not think this was possible. So he has never felt better in his entire life. So you ask, can you heal? The answer is yes. With neuroplasticity, it happens. So again, connection's the first word. So what nourishment can I get from this connecting to the past? Just being aware of it. So if you're
Mhm.
not aware of it, then you can't change direction because you're not even aware what's there.
Mhm.
The trunk is confidence. And that's the part we can talk about later, is that our confidence are the tools,
Mhm.
because being with your past is uncomfortable because a lot of it's not so pleasant.
Mhm.
So you have to learn tools to be nice to yourself, learn to tolerate uncomfortable feelings. And so that's a whole toolkit is what we put out there. I'll talk about that in a second.
Mhm.
So this first C is connection or
Mhm.
awareness. The
Mhm.
second one is confidence of the tools to help train your brain to where you want it to go. But the real healing occurs at the top of the tree of the branches, creativity. So if you're fighting off survival physiology, you can't really be creative because first of all, you're just not that happy. Second of all, your thinking brain or the creative brain gets downregulated and you can't even access creativity. You think you can try to distract yourself doing this, and this, but the bottom line is the blood supply to that part of your brain actually gets compromised. So it's connection, confidence, but the healing, again, you've already pointed this out in your own way, it occurs with creativity moving away from the surface, nurturing joy, spirituality, not as a bypass. So again, there's two parts to healing. One is to learn to live and work with your survival physiology, which is a gift. It's the gift of life.
It keeps us alive.
It keeps us alive. It's a gift. But see, we take our identity, we take it personally.
Mm.
So it's supposed to feel bad. So then we start feeling bad about ourselves. We create self-esteem and ego to help cope with that.
Mhm.
It's in the form of repetitive, unpleasant thoughts, which I think is the basis of evil. Because you get these stories to feel better about ourselves, and we can't win. We start doubling down with power and control and start doing other things to people. And part of self-esteem is actually labeling other people as less than, or you
Mm.
compare people who have more than.
Mhm.
So self-esteem is a judgment pattern that is deadly. It's absolutely deadly. And so a lot of bad things happen because you start defending your ego. You start becoming jealous of other people's successes, and you don't really nurture joy. And
Mhm.
so again, once you separate your identity from the survival reactions,
Yes.
then you have the gift of consciousness, which is choice.
Right.
So again, the healing occurs at the top of the tree with creativity.
Creativity, which you need first to connect and to your past and know
No,
what's
no,
happening.
no. You said it, you're saying it right, but I want to be really clear here. So you have to learn to connect and be with your past.
Okay.
That's it. And that's a skill set because your past is unpleasant. You've been trained on a lot of things are dangerous, so you're going to automatically react.
Mhm.
So there's a real fine line of allowing yourself to be with the past versus suppressing it. What
Okay.
got me in deep trouble was suppressing my past.
Right.
And so that's the skill set of actually learning how to be with it and
Mhm.
learn how to dampen the reactions. And then as you now have choice,
Yeah.
actually do whatever you want to do. That's why the healing is so profound because in safety, it's not psychological. You're
Yeah.
not fixing anything, you're regenerating. You're actually putting fuel back into the cells. In chronic pain, people's brains actually physically shrink. When you treat it, people's brains actually physically re-expand.
Wow.
So, for instance, with exercise, let's take exercise. We had a lecture in our study group where they looked at the histology slide, which is what the skin looks like under a microscope. And with exercise, you actually had a regeneration of what's called the subdermis of your skin. In other words, it was better than Botox because your skin would actually regenerate.
Wow.
So he showed the slide of as you get older, your skin gets thinner, as we
Yes.
know. And he showed us this, and the magic number, by the way, is 150 minutes a week.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be hard exercise. He happened to be an ultra marathoner himself, but with regular exercise, 150 minutes a week, people added 4 years to their life, but your body regenerates. Your brain expands, your skin expands, your muscles expand. Instead of losing muscle mass, you put muscle mass back on.
Wow.
Osteoporosis is an inflammatory disorder. You're chewing up your own bones.
Wow.
And so with autoimmune disorders, I mean, that's what makes me crazy because the suffering as an orthopedic surgeon, I see horrible suffering from autoimmune disorders. It destroys bones, it destroys spines. It's unbelievable. But what I find interesting, which is disturbing to me, okay, that's not psychological. Your whole body's being chewed up,
Mhm.
right?
Of course.
And so with these tools, I have one person, by the way, you might want to talk to. She's delightful. She wrote a book called Beat Autoimmune, and she had
Wow.
multiple sclerosis, which is also an autoimmune disorder. And she's back. I just had her on my podcast. I met her a few weeks ago, and she wrote a book called Beat Autoimmune. And she's back playing pickleball. You never know she's sick a day in her life. I have
Wow.
another woman on my
How old
roundtable.
is she, if you don't mind me asking?
She's 60 some. I have another physician who's about 60 some who had a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is inflammation of the entire spine. And there's a lot of structural damage from that disease. You can't reverse the structural damage, but she halted the disease. The disease is no longer progressing. So again, when you knock down the inflammatory response, you quit destroying the tissue. So remember, your stresses translates into physiology, translates into symptoms, and when it's sustained, you actually physically damage your body.
Wow.
So again, it's a physiological state that damages your body, not psychological. And so that's my personal vision is connecting medicine to the science. We've come way off base. I don't know how we did this. We learned this in medical school. So my personal vision is connecting medicine to the science. In other words, you have to learn, teach people how to feel safe. And again, we call it cues of safety. And then, so that's been missed. And so this, my personal vision is connecting medicine to the science because we've gone to a structural mode. We're doing massive spine surgery on bone spurs. It has nothing to do with the bone spurs.
If people literally, what you're saying is, if people exercised, had a sense of good friendship,
Right.
ate better, a little diet too.
Well, here's the thing. We'll talk about this in another thing. On the dynamic healing model, everything counts. In other words, the problem is people put all their eggs in one basket. So people go on these really intense diets, which helps, but then the stress around the diet actually
Yeah,
counteracts the benefits,
exactly. Yeah.
right? So diets. Remember, we talked about the input. The dynamic healing model is the input are your stresses. So I'll just give you one hint.
Okay.
So one of the cardinal rules of healing is never discuss your pain or medical care, no complaining, no gossiping, no giving unasked for advice, no criticism. Stop watching the news because what does it do? It inflames your body's physiology.
Oh my
So
God.
healing's complaint. Again, I was in chronic pain for 15 years and I was king of it. I was critical, I was judgmental, I complained a lot. I talked about my pain all the time. That's the input. What are you inputting into your brain? So one of the cardinal rules of healing chronic pain is stop it. Stop complaining about negativity. So I'm not into positive thinking because that is a way of suppressing negative thinking, but I am into putting positive input in. If
Oh.
you're complaining, that's not positive. You're being critical, that's not positive. If you're gossiping, that's not positive. So
But
what it does,
I am noticing there's a new breed of, I'm noticing sometimes, even in myself and some friends, there are times when you don't want to put in anything positive, where you just want to wallow.
well, that's you're gonna love this. I got a huge amount of blowback because I wrote a post for one of the chronic pain things called "Wallowing in Your Pain."
Okay.
It's addicting. I mean, you're being a victim is completely addicting.
Is it because we reward it? Is it because
Well,
we're
first of
rewarded
all,
for being
there's
victims?
a physiological reward for being in pain.
There's a
So, for
physiological
instance,
reward. Sorry, I don't
yeah,
understand
because
that.
you can manipulate people, you're entitled, you can protect yourself. There's a bunch of reasons to stay in pain. So the hardest part of healing is actually willingness to give up your pain. And you have to do that in steps. Nobody wants to give up their pain because it's powerful. Pain is
You
powerful.
say that, actually, I'll tell you, like a month and a half ago, I took a tumble down the stairs and fell on my knee, and it's a historic injury. And I just immediately, my thought just said, you know what, you're mid 40s, this is the beginning of the end of your physical journey and your physical fitness. And but I caught those thoughts and I said, what if this is the beginning of me trying to never take my health for granted and I actually can rehabilitate and I find a new way, and I started going down that path. And but I only chose the latter because I have nobody to help me. I had to, to pick up my daughter. I was literally limping. I had to go get my groceries. I had no one I could call to help me do anything. So do you think maybe if I did have my village, then, and I was, immediately I was given sympathy, I might have had a completely different reaction.
Well, yeah, it's also dynamic in that some phases of life you're more vulnerable and don't recover as quickly. Sometimes it's no big deal. It really depends on the phase of life that you're in. So what I would be excited about for you, and I'm happy to, help you through intermittently, is that I have this course called the DLC Journey. And so you've already got about a third of it in place already. What the course will do is like a big jigsaw puzzle.
Hmm.
It'll help you fit in the pieces. Well, why did exercise work? Why did my sociality work? Why does my mindset make a difference? So it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. So it turns out that people want to put simplistic solutions on a complex problem, and everything counts. So
Hmm.
everything you do counts. So you start adding up, adding up, adding up.
Hmm.
So within about 3 to 6 months, your brain actually starts to physically change. Remember, healing occurs with creativity.
Hmm.
You're creating new circuits in your brain away from the pain.
Right. When you say
So,
creativity, you don't mean start taking up painting. You actually mean creating new ideas.
well, painting could be one of those. I mean,
Okay.
in other words, if you're painting to distract yourself from the pain, that doesn't work. So,
Mhm.
as an outcropping of your creativity, of trying to get a new hobby or new friend or whatever you want to do,
Mhm.
it is a mindset, but in that mindset, it's play, creativity. So, the human brain evolved from play with people interacting with each other. I had extremely small play programming. In fact, I'm not sure I had any,
Mhm.
but inherently it's in there because humans evolved to cooperate, and and the best way to cooperate is through play. So
Mhm.
it's in there for everybody. I would say that, again, I just want to go back to the two parts where, again, you separate your identity from this stress physiology,
Mhm.
and then you now nurture joy,
Yes.
and they're two separate skills. They're linked, but you can't nurture joy if you're fighting off survival physiology. But you
Mhm.
don't have to fight it off. You learn to work with it and be with it. So your
Mhm.
survival physiology is not who you are, it's what you have. It's a gift. And then who you are is who you choose to be. So I want to go back to something you said that's really, really critical.
Mhm.
Is that from this second on, we're
Mhm.
programmed by our entire life. So instead of trying to fix and analyze the past, you can just turn on the lights. So, quit fighting darkness, just turn on the light. So
Mhm.
from this moment on, you can program in whatever you choose. Because
Mhm.
remember, once you learn how to process stress physiology, you can choose anything you want. And we can finish off today again. It's a sequence. The doctor indicates you through a sequence, and you can't just do it with mind over matter. You can't just randomly pick different things to do. It just doesn't work. So
Mhm.
you want to get a cohesive process about why you're doing what you're doing and when you want to do it. And then some weeks where the stresses are really high, you're going to go into fight or flight. I mean, it'd be crazy not to.
Mhm.
My thing is I would suppress that, which is a problem. So it
Right.
is just a very dynamic process. Some weeks are better than others. Some days are better than others. So, but in general, it teaches you to process adversity more quickly and nurture joy more easily. And
Mhm.
you just navigate life more easily. So you have to spend less time in fight or flight. So I have a final saying here is to have a good life. You have
Mhm.
to live a good life. It takes practice.
Mhm.
So you start programming in by choice what you want, you can literally create any life that you choose. Anything. Doesn't matter what your past is or what age it all happened at. And again, that's why I quit my start. The results have been so profound. The results are so transforming. I quit my practice.
Wow.
So I could not watch people badly damaged by spine surgery and watch so many people thrive at a level that you can't imagine. And so again, the Doc Journey is on my resources page. And then where do you live?
In London, in central London.
So I have so I coach twice a week in a group of 25 to 30 people each time. We've been doing it
Mhm.
for a couple of years. So it's at noon Pacific time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I put it at noon for the Europeans
I
because we
will
have
share the link.
yeah. So yeah, no, so it's for the Europeans. It's a little bit awkward for people from us. Let's see, Australians cannot do that time, but yeah. So for the Europeans in that part of the world, why we have people, a couple of people from England right now. We've had people from Greece right now. So yeah, it's a good time for the Europeans because it's in the evening,
Mhm.
and so it's very structured. One of the cardinal
And
rules,
can
like
anyone, if I post the link, anyone can join?
it's a subscription, but it's not very expensive. It's about $8 per session. It's a monthly subscription, and so I run it. And so the idea is that I don't try to teach on it. I try to add dimensions to the course. So it's based on the course, and so we have an assignment each week. People can read that, then we answer questions. So it's 10 minutes didactic and then small group discussions. But the fun part is people getting to know each other. there's a lot of community on the process. So
Wow.
I've been excited about it. For me personally, I learn something every time. I love seeing people get better, and
Mhm.
I people. Anyways, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. So
And on
it,
your website, and can anyone go and sign up and do the questionnaire that you mentioned?
yeah, no, no, everything. So there's two parts of it. There's the subscription services are we also have an app that's
Mhm.
based on it's very entertaining and engaging. My wife, who's a tap dancer, put that together.
Wow.
And so we have the app, which has been helpful for a lot of people. The course, which I put together. Then the coaching is what I do. And then I do recommend people start with my book, Back in Control, because it gives you the foundation of what's going on. For those considering spine surgery, I did write a book called Do You Really Need Spine Surgery? And
Mhm.
the decision making, once you break it down into two variables, the structure and your state of your nervous system, the decision making is not very hard. But anyway, so I wrote two books. I'm writing another book on repetitive unpleasant thoughts, which is in process. You'll
Mhm.
see on the resources page, I blog for Psychology Today, like I mentioned before, anxiety, another name for pain, and it
Mhm.
has over 1.3 million views. It has been very helpful for people. And then Bruce, do you know who Bruce Lipton is by chance? Have you heard of
Yes,
Bruce
yes,
Lipton?
the biology
Well,
of belief. Mhm.
yeah, he's a good friend of mine, and we put a series together of 4 videos. It's also on my resources page.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so we were excited about that. And that's a little bit of a story also,
Very
but
exciting. Actually, we would love to have both of you on together to discuss this a bit more.
yeah,
Um,
that could be a lot of fun.
yeah. Yes, let's definitely build a relationship where we can carry on this conversation because you've given us a lot of information, but it is counter to everything we've been told. And so it almost as if you have to unlearn so much of what we have been taught to cope with things.
So I'll just coach you just a little bit.
Okay.
So just like riding a bicycle, you cannot unlearn how to ride a bicycle.
Okay.
So your behavioral patterns and circuits are absolutely permanent, including your pain circuits.
Okay.
So if you try to change them, your attention's on the problem. So that's where you separate and put in whatever you want. That's the key.
Wow.
Healing occurs with creativity, and your brain physically changes structure.
That's more hopeful
I
than
mean,
trying
yeah,
to undo things.
right. And I'll send you a link on the comparison between the brain and artificial intelligence. I mean,
Okay.
artificial intelligence is completely dependent on the data you put into it, but it's also dependent on the processing system. So, for instance, if you teach an artificial intelligence computer to play chess, if you teach with somebody like myself who can't play chess, the computer can't learn how to play chess. So, if you have a master teaching it, so when you put in
A
when you,
master player.
I'm sorry. So if you have a chess master teaching AI how to play chess with the correct rules, it can eventually beat the chess master because you're putting in correct input and processing it differently. So look at the humans. We're the same thing. We're programmed our entire life. So we have a lot of bad data coming in. We're
Yes.
not taught how to process it. So as you learn how to put in better data and learn how to process it more adeptly, it's miraculous. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how completely people change. So the artificial intelligence is remarkably similar to the human brain. It's not going to ever outperform the human. I mean, the chess game can never be human because it doesn't have physiology. In other words, your brain consciousness comes from interpreting your body's chemistry.
Mhm.
So that's why artificial intelligence is not going to take over the planet. But you can still, but look at the human brain. That's why we're sort of plummeting downhill as a society because we have lots of input. We're processing data in that's not so correct. We're certainly not taught how to process it. So that's why I think at a societal level, we're just plummeting spiraling out of control.
Yeah. So much information that you can't make sense of it in any
Right.
way.
Right.
And then the
But you
people
but you don't but you don't have to.
you don't have to process it. You can
No, you
just
just get to you get to
disregard
you get
it.
to you get to choose to download into your brain whatever you choose.
I love that.
That's the key. So you can just let the rest of it go. So I call it the eye of the storm. Is
Mhm.
that a hurricane, the wind represents your thoughts and circumstances. You learn to pull yourself into the center. I mean, you get pulled back into it all the time. So people want some permanent cure. That's not life. So you just learn to navigate life more easily, more adeptly. And I think this stuff should be taught in grade school, by the way, but this is a different topic. The essence of healing is simply lowering their physiology and increasing time and safety, not trying to get rid of either one. And we have what's called the circle of life with the ring of fire, and every emotional state is necessary and part of life. So as you just learn to become aware of which part of this emotional curve you're in, then you simply change directions under your volition. And so it's just not that hard to do.
It is really, really empowering to learn this new way of being.
And what I'm excited about for you personally, you've already said about 5 things today that are just dead on. And so once you understand why what you do works versus not, you're going to start going towards what does work and doing less of what doesn't work.
Mhm.
And you're already on a pretty good roll.
Mhm.
So you'll be shocked.
Yeah, I think it depends on the days. You should have seen me a few days ago when I started with my day on Twitter.
No, but that's what I'm saying is that there's days when your stresses are high, you're going to go into fight or flight. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You don't fight that. Okay, so okay, I'm aware I'm in fight or flight. I'm in the red.
Mhm.
Okay, so how long do I want to stay here? You can
Mhm.
stay there as long as you want. So the question I keep asking my group over and over again, okay, you're in the red, you're stressed out. Are you okay with that?
Mhm.
Can you be
I
okay?
let it play out because I find now that sometimes until I go to sleep, I really can't do anything but to reset myself. Some days, like if I've
Right.
spent the whole day watching war footage and then I've watched, the disintegration of politics in America or somewhere else, and it's just so much for me that I just think, you know what, tomorrow I'm starting my day at the gym.
Can I give you some homework to start your process?
Yes.
I used to do this in my office all the time with my patients. So again, I would not work with. So the reason why the process evolved, I didn't have a lot of time. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about patients to their troubles and whatever. I didn't spend time teaching them because I didn't have time. So it's a very self-directed process. So if you're interested, please consider going through the doc journey process. Again, reading the book first, and
Okay.
that's the basis of it. But one of the rules that gets into a little bit into leg one. So I said, like, when you leave my office, you're not going to discuss your pain or medical care ever again, period, except to your doctor.
Mhm.
No complaining, period.
Mhm.
No gossiping, period. No discussing your medical care or pain at all.
When you say no gossiping, what does that mean?
Gossiping. I
Like
mean, you can talk about
like
situations, circumstances.
celebrity gossip? Because I spend, I watch like The Housewives, and to me that's very gossipy.
I would tell you to stop watching those programs. Just stop it.
Mhm.
You watch what happens. So stop watching the news.
Mhm.
I mean, give yourself 15 minutes a day, maybe half an hour to look at some basic news and the headlines, and that's it.
Yeah.
Is what's being downloaded into your brain.
Mhm. Yes.
So when I say gossiping, that means speaking ill, and we all do this, and there's a reason for it physiologically. But yeah, don't speak ill of anybody, no matter what. I
Mhm.
mean, you can say, somebody's
I
going
really
through.
am very good with that. What I do find I feel guilty about is reading so much of the tabloids, and then I feel as if I've gossiped. When I
Okay,
think
so
that I
yeah,
took part in a celebrity's, disintegration, I feel so bad.
okay, so take a deep breath.
Mhm.
Okay, you want to feel less anxious, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so these are concrete steps, and it won't be easy, by the way. So it's going to take at least 2 to 4 weeks to actually accomplish this, but just give an absolute stop on all that. Just stop. Look, so come off. I mean, you might need some social media to communicate. Come off social media.
Mhm.
Come off the other things we talked about. Just stop. It's very
I
concrete.
honestly already, if I can do that, I can feel my well-being rising.
Right. Just come off of it. I mean, I have to do emails, a little bit of social media, but just stop.
Yeah.
I mean, you might look at Instagram, which is a lot of, I mean, my wife is sort of fixated on kitten videos, which is fine. I mean, that stuff's easy, but even limit that.
Yeah, but if
And
you
then,
don't know, they don't just let you have the kitten anymore. The way it's programmed
I
now,
know.
They will feed you through some war images.
Right, I know. So honestly, the so just think about things that you put in your nervous system. Actually, you know better than I do because it's your nervous system, but just notice what fires you up and just stop doing that. That's the easiest way to calm down through physiology is stopping that input.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other things about circumstances beyond your control, which we can talk about later, how to process that. But it's a very concrete way to start the process of healing is to stop putting in input that's stimulating like that.
I really love that. I think one
Listen, so
thing,
next time we talk, we'll focus on that
yeah. Well,
and
it's
see
really
what's
helpful the fact that you listed all these inflammatory diseases like Parkinson's, and people now know that if I go down this route, these are the kind of things that I'll be dealing with.
right, right. But
That's
I'm just guessing you have your share of anxiety.
yeah, always.
Nobody wants to talk about it because it's become sort of normalized, especially amongst physicians. You go, anxiety? What are you talking about? Because we have a very tough facade that I'm not anxious. You're anxious. How could you be anxious? I'm not anxious. I mean, people don't want to talk about it, but that is the essence of physician burnout is suppressed anxiety. We get
Yeah.
sick and
I
we
think
burn out.
for me, I do what you say, which is like masking and then positive psychology, where I just think, okay, if you just smile through it, if you this, if you that, but I get to a point where I can feel it in my body, and I can feel the negativity start to affect me. Then I need to call someone, so I will reach out to a family member and just say, you know what, they're driving me crazy. I feel like honestly I'm going to get COVID or whatever it was that caused me
So
to feel.
that's complaining.
Mhm,
Stop.
mhm,
You have to completely, especially to family members.
mhm.
I mean, it's hard. It's harder than it looks, but it's been the number one thing. And there's a bit of a story behind that. So that is very high up in the list of starting points. In other words, people do all these other processes, but they're still downloading stuff in their brain that's activating. The rest of it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's just one very concrete starting point. And again, it'll take you at least 2 to 4 weeks for it to really start taming down. Eventually, it'll feel odd to go to a negative mode. So I'll just sum it up by just saying don't input negativity. That's different than positive thinking.
Wow. Yeah.
Remember, inputting negativity fires up your physiology, which
Mhm,
is this massive survival reaction,
mhm.
and positive thinking is a very feeble attempt to counteract the physiology. So you're putting in stuff that activates your physiology, trying to counteract it with stuff that's very ineffective to counteract that. So
Mhm.
the key is don't input the stuff that fires up your
Almost
physiology.
like making a mess, dirtying it up, then bringing back the mess, and just
Yeah,
constantly cleaning it up. Yeah.
right. Yeah, no. I mean, again, your insights are extremely. That's why I'm excited about you going through this process because you instinctively have figured a lot of this already out. Once you start putting these pieces together, you're going, oh. So anyway, I'm excited for you. We'll see how it goes.
Yes, I look forward to it, and hopefully we can reconnect again soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
All right. Thank you. All right. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.